Okay, so our last lesson on the health and disease topic is going to be on sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. And as the name suggests, these are all infections that are transmitted through sexual activity. So because you can see that they're infections, that does mean that these that they're caused by pathogens. And typically the pathogens in question are going to be viruses and bacteria. So protists and fungi aren't really an issue here. All of the common STIs are going to be caused by a virus or by a bacteria. And again, as the name suggests, sexually transmitted, this pathogen, be it a virus or a bacteria, is going to be transmitted or spread through sexual contact. So I'm just going to clarify what I mean by sexual contact. Okay, because there's a few different things that are going to come under the umbrella term of sexual contact. Perhaps the most obvious is just having unprotected sex. When we talk about unprotected sex, that could be unprotected vaginal sex, unprotected anal sex, or unprotected oral sex. So it's not just vaginal sex, it's also anal or oral sex. So obviously by this I mean, so vaginal sex would be penis in vagina, anal sex would be penis in anus, and oral sex would be penis in mouth. And by unprotected, I mean that this is taking place without a condom. So when we're talking about sex in this context, it's some sort of penetrative sex, and unprotected would be without a condom. So any of these can lead to the spread of STIs, okay, including oral sex. And then also in some cases, now this is just in general about STIs, there's obviously lots of different STIs and they will spread in slightly different ways. But for some STIs, genital contact is enough. So even if you haven't actually had sex and there's been no penetration, and even if there's been no orgasm, so there's no spreading of sexual fluids like semen, even if it's just genital to genital contact, that can be enough to spread some STIs. Now, not all of them, but it is enough to spread some STIs. So it's important to bear that in mind. If this is how sexually transmitted infections are spread, then if you want to prevent transmission, so again, that word transmission just means spread. So prevent transmission just means stops the spread. So if you want to stop the spread of STIs, you'll notice here when I was talking about sex, I have the word unprotected. Okay, that means without a condom. So if you want to protect against transmission, you can simply use a condom. And that will allow you to have sex, but without spreading the disease. There are actually a kind of a male and female equivalent of condoms. So condom is the word we would use for the male equivalent, which is the thin piece of like latex that the male would put on his penis. But there is an equivalent for female called a dam, and it's a similar idea. It's just a really thin piece of latex that would go over the vagina. So they're both examples of protection, and typically we'd associate condoms being used to prevent pregnancy, but it's really important that even if you were having the likes of anal sex and oral sex, where obviously you can't get pregnant through anal or oral sex, that you would still use condoms to prevent the spread of STIs. Okay, so it's really important that you're not just using protection to prevent pregnancies. They also are really important in the fight against STIs. The other thing that's important to just make sure that they don't spread is getting regular STI tests. Now, this obviously only applies when you are sexually active. You're not going to pick up an STI if you are not sexually active. Okay, so if we look at all the ways that STIs are spread, okay, it's through sexual contact. Okay, you're not just going to pick up an STI because you've shared a toilet with someone who has an STI. So these viruses and bacteria, that cause sexually transmitted infections, they don't survive outside the body. So you're not going to pick one up by sharing a toilet with someone who's got the disease. You're not going to pick one up by sharing a towel or anything like that. Okay, it is all through sexual contact. So obviously, if you're not sexually active, you're in no danger of picking up an STI. When you are sexually active, particularly if you've had unprotected sex, then you should be getting an STI test, because what you're going to see when we look at symptoms is a lot of STIs don't have any symptoms at all, so you'd have no idea you were infected. So anytime you have a new sexual partner, it is really important to get tested to make sure that you don't have any STIs. So yeah, when I talk about symptoms, so again, this is just, there's lots of different STIs, and at the moment I'm just talking in general, so I'm not looking at any of them specifically, I'm just talking in general. There is a number of different general symptoms, and as I said a minute ago, some STIs aren't going to produce any symptoms at all, but the kind of symptoms that you might look out for as signs, so something like unusual discharge. It can be from the vagina, penis, or even the anus. Notice the word unusual there, okay? Some discharge, or discharge in general, is perfectly normal and it's perfectly healthy, okay? When we're talking about unusual discharge, anything unusual about it, so the smell could be unusual, or more of it than normal, or the colour could be unusual, but just discharge itself is not a symptom of an STI. It's perfectly normal and perfectly healthy, but it's unusual discharge out of the norm that might be an indication. So that's one potential symptom. Another is just pain when urinating, so when you're going to the toilet, experiencing pain. Now, there are lots of other things that can cause pain when urinating. You could just simply have a urinary tract infection. So just because you experience pain when urinating does not mean you have an STI, okay? It's just a kind of a general symptom. Kind of more indicative of a sexually transmitted infection would be lumps or rash or itchiness or even blisters in the genital area. And then a final one would be, in females, unusual vaginal bleeding. And by unusual, I obviously mean not when you're on your period. That's totally normal. It's outside your period if you are bleeding when you shouldn't be, unusual bleeding. So again, these are just general symptoms that occur for a number of different STIs, but each STI will be slightly different. And as I say, a lot of STIs aren't going to cause you symptoms at all. Okay, so this is just kind of overview of STIs. Okay, how they're transmitted is always through sexual contact. To prevent transmission, really important to use protection. And then these are general symptoms, but there are lots of them that you're not going to have symptoms at all. Okay, there are two of the sexually transmitted infections that we need to look at in more detail, and those two are chlamydia and HIV. So we're going to start with chlamydia. Okay, I said all of your sexually transmitted infections are caused by a virus or bacteria. In the case of chlamydia, it's caused by a bacteria, and you do need to know that. You need to know chlamydia is a sexually transmitted infection caused by the spread of this bacteria. Okay, and in terms of symptoms with chlamydia, it's mostly no symptoms. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, if there aren't any symptoms, and I'm not even going to know I have it, and it doesn't affect my life at all, then what's the big deal? Does it really matter if I've got chlamydia when it's not giving me any symptoms, and I don't even know I've got it? Yes, okay, because even though it's mostly no symptoms, it can be serious if it's not treated. And one of the long-term effects of chlamydia is infertility, so that you wouldn't be able to have children. Okay, so if you get infected with the chlamydia bacteria, it mightn't show any symptoms, so you have no idea you've got it, you don't treat it, and later on down the line, you could end up being infertile. And it's not just infertility. There are a few other kind of long-term health effects that can be caused by chlamydia. But it's not a problem. You can treat it really easily if you know you've got it. Okay, it's a bacteria, so you can use antibiotics, which you're going to jot down in a second. Okay, so if you know you've got it, you'll treat it really easily. But a lot of people don't know they've got it, and that can lead to serious health effects later down the line. As well, if you don't know you've got it and you think you're clear of all STIs and then you're having unprotected sex yourself, you can spread that on to other people. So chlamydia is really, really common. It's really, really common in the UK, especially amongst young people. I think under the age of 25 is the kind of most common age for people to have chlamydia. So it's rampant in the UK. It's really easy to pick it up. So it's really important if you're having sex that you're using protection, and if you have had unprotected sex that you get checked, because you'll have no idea that you've got it otherwise. When we're talking about how it's transmitted, I'm just going to write all of the above, because chlamydia is one that you can get from just genital to genital contact. So even if you didn't actually have sex, if there was no penetration, if there was no orgasm and no ejaculation, so no semen is released, no vaginal fluid is released, it can still be transmitted just from genital to genital contact. So gonorrhea is really, really contagious, and it will spread really easily. But on the plus side, even though it spreads really easily because it's caused by a bacteria, a simple course of antibiotics will sort it right out. So if you go and get diagnosed with chlamydia, you'll be given antibiotics to take. You take them for like a week and it will totally clear it up and you'll be absolutely fine. Okay, it's only really dangerous if you don't catch it until later on. So it's just important to bear in mind that it's not the end of the world. If you've got chlamydia, it can be very easily treated. Okay, so that's chlamydia. You do need to know that it's caused by bacteria. You do need to know that it's transmitted through sexual contact, and therefore the best way to prevent the spread of chlamydia is to use contraception, condoms, or DAMs. And if you do get it because it's a bacteria, it can be treated with antibiotics. And then we're going to look at HIV. It's probably one that you are more familiar with, or at least have heard of. And HIV stands for the Human Immunodeficiency Virus. Okay, so when we want to know what pathogen is causing HIV, well, the clue is in the name. That V in HIV stands for virus. So you know it's a virus. It's not a bacteria, it is a virus. And if we look at what it stands for, Human Immunodeficiency Virus, okay, we've learned about the immune system already. We know that's our defense system in our body that fights infections. And we've also come across that word deficiency. We saw it when we were looking at non-communicable diseases and about poor nutrition, and about being deficient in certain nutrients. So if you were deficient in iron, you didn't have enough iron. Deficient in vitamin C, you didn't have enough vitamin C. So this word altogether, immunodeficiency, it's telling you that you don't have enough of your immune system. So specifically, you don't have enough white blood cells. And the reason is because the HIV virus is going to kill your white blood cells, which will leave your immune system severely weakened. Okay, so we're going to write that underneath. It damages and indeed destroys your white blood cells. Okay, and it damages a type of white blood cell that we haven't looked at yet. Okay, so there are phagocytes and lymphocytes. They're the two that we need to know. But what HIV does is it damages a different type of white blood cell called T helper cells. Now, there are lots of types of white blood cells. You don't need to know them all. The only ones you need to be aware of are phagocytes and lymphocytes. But HIV actually damages these other types, the T helper cells. And T helper cells, as we're going to see in a few minutes when we look at a question, T helper cells, their job, as their name suggests, helper, is to help the phagocytes and the lymphocytes. And what they do is they stimulate and they alert the phagocytes and the lymphocytes, and they tell them that there's a pathogen in the body. and they get the whole immune system up and going. Okay, they're the one that kickstart the immune system and kickstart the fight against the pathogen. And without these T helper cells, you've still got phagocytes and you've still got lymphocytes, but they're not doing their jobs properly because they're not being activated and they're not being stimulated. So the T helper cells are really important, and the HIV virus is going to come in and destroy them, which is going to stop your immune system working properly. So HIV itself is the virus. That's the name of the virus. And it can cause the disease AIDS. So AIDS is the disease and HIV is the virus. And AIDS is another acronym, and it just stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. Now, just because you've got the HIV virus, just because you're HIV positive, say HIV positive if you've got the HIV virus, doesn't mean that you're going to end up getting the disease AIDS. So the HIV virus will destroy your white blood cells, okay? But it's only if it gets really, really bad and your immune system becomes incredibly weak that they diagnose you with the actual disease AIDS. So it might never get as far as AIDS. You could have the virus in your system without getting AIDS, but if it gets really bad and the virus really, really compromises your immune system and kills loads and loads of your white blood cells, then they say that you've got this disease AIDS, where basically your immune system is just not working at all. Okay, so we're going to look later on at treatment and how you can prevent HIV infection leading to AIDS. So we're going to look at how HIV is treated, but for the time being, we're just going to look at the transmission first. So how is HIV spread? How is it transmitted? How is it spread? Okay. And HIV, the virus itself, concentrates itself in body fluids. And you've got lots of body fluids. They don't all spread HIV. So in order for the body fluid to spread the HIV virus, you need to have a high viral load. You need to have quite a lot of the virus within the body fluid. And some body fluids will have a high viral load of HIV, and others will basically have none, and you won't be in danger of getting the disease from those fluids. So the body fluids that do transmit, okay, semen, also vaginal fluids, anal fluids, blood, and also breast milk. Okay, so because you've got high levels of the virus in semen, vaginal fluids, and anal fluids, that means that having unprotected sex can lead to the spread of disease. Whether it's vaginal sex or anal sex, it can lead to the spread of the disease. So it's really, really important to prevent the spread of HIV that you are always using protection, because these fluids all contain high amounts of the virus. Also get it in blood, okay? So blood is not exchanged through sexual contact, but if you were sharing needles with someone, so it's quite common to be spread amongst drug addicts or heroin users. If you're sharing needles with people, dirty needles, it can be spread that way, okay? If you were to accept a blood donation for someone with HIV, you would definitely pick up the virus. There's a high viral load in the blood. And then also in breast milk. So if you're a new mother and you are HIV positive, you should not be breastfeeding your baby. Although, to be fair, if you were HIV positive when you were pregnant, there's also a really high chance that you would have passed the virus to the fetus through the placenta or through the umbilical cord. So there are actually, I think there are ways now to stop the spread. If you're HIV positive and you're pregnant, you can take certain drugs during your pregnancy that will reduce the likelihood of it being passed, but it's not a guarantee. There is still quite a high chance that you will pass the virus from mother to baby while the baby is still in the uterus. But if you manage to avoid that, and your baby was born without the HIV virus, you then definitely should not be breastfeeding, because there's a high level of the virus in the breast milk itself, okay? So this is how it's transmitted, through these body fluids. I just want to, it's not transmitted through saliva, okay, which means you could kiss someone with HIV and not get infected. It's also not transmitted through urine, and it's not transmitted through sweat. So there are other body fluids, but they don't all have the HIV virus. So it's perfectly fine to kiss someone with HIV. You're not going to pick up the virus, but having unprotected sex with someone with HIV will leave you to pick up the virus. Again, the virus does not survive outside the body. So again, you're not going to pick up the virus from toilet seats or anything like that. Okay, it dies when it leaves the body, so you're not gonna pick it up on surfaces. Now, at the moment with the coronavirus, people are still unsure how long it can survive on surfaces. So like, people are like disinfecting their shopping and disinfecting everything they bring into their homes. Okay, that really won't be necessary with HIV, because we do know that it dies as soon as it leaves the body, so it's not going to be spread on surfaces. Okay, so it's only going to be spread through the transmission of these fluids. In terms of prevent the spread. If you wanted to prevent the spread, it's going to be the same as what we had before. Okay, you are going to protected sex. Okay, but also because it's spread through blood, you're going to write don't share needles. And because it can be spread through breast milk, you're going to write don't breastfeed. So it does count as a sexually transmitted infection because it is spread through sexual contact, but it's also spread through other means. Okay, so it's really important when you're talking about HIV that you also remember that you shouldn't share needles and you shouldn't breastfeed. Okay, that's not applicable for chlamydia, which is just passed through sexual contact, but it is applicable for HIV. Okay. If we look at the symptoms, so when we're talking about the symptoms of HIV, they're not the typical symptoms that you would expect of an STI. So when we looked at STI symptoms, we were talking about unusual discharge and kind of lumps and rashes and itchiness around the genital area. So it was all kind of focused on the genital area, and all of the symptoms were focused on the genital area. But if we look at what HIV is doing, HIV is destroying your white blood cells, and your white blood cells are involved in fighting infection. So if you've got a virus that's killing your white blood cells, the symptoms that you're going to experience is just a weakened immune system, which means you're going to get sick more often. And the most common kind of early symptom of HIV infection is a flu-like illness. Okay, your white blood cells aren't working properly when you first get infected with this HIV virus. So you're more likely to pick up a flu or to pick up a cold. So you're going to have like a runny nose and a cough and a sore throat and all the rest of it. So nothing related to the genital area at all. These symptoms are more flu-like because the virus is destroying your white blood cells. But often you've got no symptoms, okay? Again, with HIV, you can often be infected and have no symptoms and just not know about it. And we say that the virus is dormant, that it's in your body, but it's not producing any symptoms, okay? But just because it's not producing any symptoms does not mean it's not doing damage. So it will continue to damage your immune system, even if you don't know about it. And then eventually, you will start to feel the effects, but it can be quite a long time. We say the virus is dormant, that it's existing in your immune system existing in your body without doing a huge amount of damage. So you're not experiencing symptoms, but it is slowly chipping away at your immune system, and eventually you will feel the effects of it, even though for some people it can take years before they're in any way aware that they've been infected. Okay, which brings me on to treatment. Yeah. First of all, it's important to say that there is no cure for the HIV virus. Okay, so when we talk about chlamydia, simple course of antibiotics and you're done. Okay, and it's all good. With HIV, there is no cure. If you're HIV positive, you will remain HIV positive for the rest of your life. There's no getting rid of it. Okay, what they do use in terms of treatment is called antiretroviral treatment. That's the treatment that they do use. And what this does is it stops the virus replicating. So if you remember back when we just looked at viruses in general, and we said that viruses can't replicate by themselves, They need to get inside a human cell and to take over the DNA, and they use your cell to replicate. And what these drugs do is they just stop the virus from replicating. Now, there's no drug that's going to destroy the viruses that are already in your body, but what they can do is stop them dividing, stop them replicating, and slow them down. The whole point of this is to keep the viral load low. Okay, you want the level of virus in your body to be as low as possible. And if you keep it as low as possible, even though the viruses in your body are damaging your immune system, because there are so few viral particles, they're not doing that much damage because the immune system can repair itself. So if you've only got a few viral particles in your system and they're chipping away and killing a few white blood cells, well, it doesn't matter if they're killing only a few white blood cells, because white blood cells can repair themselves and white blood cells are constantly dividing. So as long as the viral load is nice and low, your immune system can cope. You'll still be able to fight off any infections. Okay, so you can't get rid of the virus, but if you stop it replicating, keep the load really, really low, then your immune system can cope with it and you won't experience any negative symptoms. Okay, so I'm just going to write, keeping the viral load low will allow the immune system to repair itself. Stops the immune system becoming overwhelmed. But these drugs, as I said, you can't get rid of the virus. It's not a case of you take these drugs for a week and you're good, okay? These drugs need to be taken every day. You will take these drugs for the rest of your life, okay? Every single day. And we talked about, when we looked at antibiotics, we talked about bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. So bacteria mutating and changing shape and becoming kind of a different form of themselves. So that the antibiotic wouldn't work on them anymore. And there's that problem with viruses as well. They can slightly mutate inside their body, become a different form of the HIV virus that is no longer affected by drugs. And again, this is called drug resistance. So if you're taking these drugs every single day, it's really likely that the viruses will learn how to mutate because they want to survive. So they'll learn how to mutate and become resistant to these drugs. So you, therefore, to avoid that, and it's still a problem, but if you take a combination of different drugs and you're kind of constantly changing up the antiviral medication that you're taking, so you're not just going to take the same drug every single day. You'll take a mixture of drugs every day. It's kind of like a little cocktail of drugs. And you'll be constantly changing up. They'll all be antiretroviral drugs. They'll all be doing the same thing, but you're just using different forms of the same drug to avoid, it's difficult to completely prevent, but to avoid resistance. So that is how it is treated. But as I said, there's no cure. And you might be wondering, why isn't there a vaccine for HIV? HIV has been around for ages. How have they not come up with a vaccine yet? Okay, well, the same reason that your body can't get rid of the HIV virus. Okay, we've got, obviously, our lymphocytes will try and produce antibodies against HIV, and they can produce some antibodies that slow the HIV virus down. But the antibodies our lymphocytes produce don't fully destroy the HIV virus. Okay, it's a very difficult virus to destroy, and our antibodies that our white blood cells produce aren't capable of fully destroying the HIV virus. Okay, so if you think of the whole point of the whole point of a vaccine is to stimulate your lymphocytes to produce antibodies. Okay, but if our lymphocytes aren't capable of producing these antibodies, well, effective antibodies in the first place, they can produce antibodies, just not ones that are very effective, then a vaccine isn't actually going to be any use, okay, if our antibodies aren't capable of fighting it in the first place, okay? So HIV vaccine, I mean, they've tried long and hard to come up with a HIV vaccine, but it doesn't look like it's ever going to be a thing. And the other point is the whole reason with a vaccine is that you inject a very small load of the virus and train your body how to react to this virus. As I said, with the HIV, it can be dormant inside of your body for a long time. So quite a small amount of it just living dormant inside your body. I mean, they're the perfect conditions for your white blood cells to just start producing antibodies and attack it, yet our body isn't capable of doing it. So introducing a vaccine isn't going to bring about that response either. So unfortunately, a HIV vaccine just doesn't seem to be plausible. The drugs that they do have are effective. They slow it right down, and people who are HIV positive can now live long lives. And they don't necessarily all develop AIDS. Whereas back in the day when it first came to prominence, back in the 80s, being HIV positive was a death sentence. You were absolutely going to die, and you were going to die quite quickly. And that's not the case anymore. So treatment has massively improved. But unfortunately, there is no cure, and there's no way of fully ridding yourself from the virus. I'm going to show you a question now. It's a 6-mark question on HIV that comes up in the end of chapter test on this topic. This is from the the higher paper of the end of chapter tests. I'm just going to show you the question. I'm going to show you the question, and then we'll go through the answer. But it is 6 marks, and it's on the effect of HIV on the blood cells. Oh, I'll just cover that. I'm going to cover my answer. Okay, so this is a 6-mark question, okay? You don't need to know this. That's why they give you the information in the questions. You're not expected to know this, although I have mentioned it, okay? So these are white blood cells. This one we've come across before. This is the phagocyte. And this we've come across before. This is the lymphocyte. So they're the 2 types of white blood cell that we have learned about. And then upstream, you've got this other type of white blood cell called a T helper cell. And as you can see from the diagram, it tells you that the T helper cell stimulates the phagocytes and it stimulates the lymphocytes. And T helper cells, the HIV virus attacks the T helper cells. They're specifically the white blood cell that it will attack and it will destroy. And then the question asks you, why are people with AIDS more likely to become seriously ill with infections such as the common cold? Okay, so if you don't have your T helper cells, so if you're someone who has got AIDS and your T helper cells have been destroyed and your phagocytes are not being stimulated and activated and your lymphocytes will not be stimulated and activated, why does that make you more likely to become seriously ill from a disease such as the common cold? Okay, so this is a 6-mark question. Tell me what lymphocytes do, tell me what phagocytes do, and then tell me that that's not going to happen in a person with AIDS. I'm going to pause it, take some time to write your own answer, and then come back when you're ready to check your answer. Sorry, I'll pause it. Okay, so I've written my answer, okay? And this information, first line, I've gotten from the diagrams. I said T helper cells stimulate phagocytes. So I've identified this cell as a phagocyte. And then I've said what phagocytes do. So once phagocytes are stimulated, they will then surround and engulf pathogens, or surround and destroy pathogens. Okay, they destroy pathogens. I've also said T helper cells stimulate lymphocytes, because that's what these cells are. And then I've said what lymphocytes do. Okay, lymphocytes produce antibodies against pathogens. So this is what happens in a normal person's immune system. Someone who does not have AIDS, they will have phagocytes and lymphocytes, which will be stimulated by the T helper cells, and it will cause the phagocytes and lymphocytes to attack the pathogens. If you're a person with AIDS, however, the phagocytes, they're there, you still have phagocytes, but they're not going to engulf the pathogens. And lymphocytes, even though they're there, they're not going to produce antibodies, okay? Without the T helper cells to activate them, they're going to be there, but they're not going to do anything. So if your phagocytes aren't doing anything and your lymphocytes aren't doing anything, then the pathogens that enter the body aren't going to be destroyed. And even if that pathogen is just something as simple as a common cold, if your phagocytes and lymphocytes aren't fighting it, then you're going to become seriously ill. Okay, so that's why a person with AIDS is more likely to become ill. They've got phagocytes, they've got antibodies, but they're not being stimulated, so they're not surrounding and engulfing, they're not producing antibodies, and those pathogens, even a simple cold that enters the body of someone with AIDS, are just going to be allowed to multiply to the point where you become seriously, seriously ill, and you can end up dying from a cold. Okay, so AIDS, an immuno disease, is incredibly serious when it becomes advanced. That is it for this lesson. I am going to be in the lesson on Wednesday. I'm going to be in the lesson on Friday. And this is generally a topic that sparks lots and lots of questions. So if you've got any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm going to put the quiz up as well on Show Me Homework. And on Friday, we'll go through the answers. But yeah, if you've got any questions in the meantime, tune in on Wednesday or on Friday. I'm going to go through the content of this lesson live on Wednesday as well for those of you who find it difficult to watch my videos.